Okay, hopefully this is working. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes. Yes. Okay, wonderful. Okay, this is much better. Can you guys see each other? Yay! Hooray! Hooray for real classes. Okay, cool. Well, that is a relief. When in doubt, fall back on Zoom. I was hoping just to simplify things, and use the Canvas thing, but it turns out it sucks. This actually, Zoom embeds surprisingly well in Canvas though, and it's actually not too much of an ask, I don't think. So yeah, I think that's good. This is good. All right, we've got another minute or two before things start. How's everyone doing today? Yeah? Good, more or less? That's exciting. It's a cloudy, crappy day outside. It doesn't look like it from my window. Like there's a lot more light coming through on the video than there is in real life. So I'm just gonna look at my video version of myself and feel happier because it's not that sunny. Try something out. Ha ha ha. We're gonna pretend we're not in a pandemic and we're at Lincoln Land Community College. There's the Lincoln Commons behind me. We're having an outdoor class today, evidently. I like that. That's cool. All right, it is 10:01, so we can kick things off. Well, I'm glad to see you guys are doing fairly well. I'm doing great as well. This is it's an exciting end to a crazy first week of the semester. Make sure I get my document questions up. Yes. Okay. So what we're doing basically in the first couple weeks is just kind of getting acquainted with the pattern of the class. We'll be doing interactive stuff on Tuesdays, stuff related to the topic of that week, of that module. Fridays, more often than not, unless we're in the middle of a role-playing game, we are going to be discussing the documents from our, from our perspectives book, of which I'll usually assign 2 a week, maybe 3 if they're short. But you can almost always expect to be reading at least a couple of these documents on weeks that we're not fully devoted to doing a historical game. And so that's what we're doing today. This is the first Friday of the semester, and as such, we are going to be discussing our documents today. The reason why we're discussing them is twofold. Number one, to simulate a real class, a real classroom at Lincoln Land. If we were doing this in person, we would be doing this together in a classroom, and we'd be discussing and kind of honing our discussion skills, But second of all, these are directly relevant to the analysis paper assignments, the first of which is due next Friday. And I'll be discussing more that stuff immediately after we're done discussing these documents. Okay, so if you're worried at all, like, what is this paper? What am I supposed to do? We're going to get to that in about 20 minutes. Okay. So, yeah. All right. So yeah, let's get to it. So your documents for this week are of the ancient variety. They're documents that are a little bit different than what we're mostly going to be reading the rest of the semester. Most of the rest of the semester is devoted to like books or treatises or, I guess occasionally poetry. It's like stuff that's like definitely written down on a piece of paper. Because that's what civilization looks like after the, prehistoric period, is people writing stuff down on parchment or papyrus or paper. This week is a little different because we're at like square one of humanity, right? And so Code of Hammurabi is not a document per se, but it's sort of laws written on an obelisk that's in the middle of like the Babylonian town square. And the ancient love poetry in Egypt is like hieroglyphics scrawled on the walls of some ancient building. So, so things are a little bit, but they're still going to be referred to as documents, like whatever form these firsthand sources look like. I'm just going to collectively refer to them as documents. So, document number one, Code of Hammurabi. You should be familiar after doing your textbook reading with, Babylon, one of the ancient civilizations in Mesopotamia. Hammurabi is a powerful king that kind of helps unite this Mesopotamian area under one rulership called Babylon. And he does so through like cunning and through extensive use of diplomacy and laws and stuff. His main body of law that we have like the original set of, which is miraculous that it's lasted thousands of years, is called the Code of Hammurabi. And this is basically his like codified rule book for how to govern his Babylonian empire. So all that prologue out of the way then. My prologue anyway. My first question, I suppose, deals with the prologue that Hammurabi wrote for his own body of laws. Like before he gets into like law number one, law number two, there's this little section where he kind of talks about where these laws came from, where the inspiration comes from, and what authority he has to write these things. So at the beginning of page 21 in your book, what does Hammurabi, and this is an open question for you guys, right? This is how Fridays are going to roll. What authority does Hammurabi draw on to say, here are my laws, they are good, trust me, follow these laws? In other words, like, why, how does he convince the people of Babylon that they should follow his rule book for society? What authority does he draw on?
He talks about being appointed by the gods, which, I mean, that's something that many later rulers also claimed. So
yeah, absolutely. This is a common trope throughout history. God told me to do something. Hammurabi is doing the same thing. It's like, look, I've prayed about this. I've meditated about this. Since I'm the king, I kind of have like a direct line to Marduk, like, the god of Babylon. And he told me that these laws should be, given to my people by the gods. Like he claims the gods as his authority. And you're absolutely right. Like this is something that happens throughout history, right? Kings draw on their authority of the divine, their perceived divine authority to rule over their subjects. Okay, so that out of the way, these are the gods' laws, not just Hammurabi's laws, but they come from heaven. And so therefore they are good and just. We will determine if that is true in just a minute. So broad question for anybody. And I want to hear from multiple people. What kinds of laws are we talking about here? What kinds of things are forbidden or punishable in Hammurabi's kingdom?
Adultery.
Sorry, Michael, what was that?
Adultery.
Adultery is punishable. Yeah, if you cheat on your spouse, punishment, boom. Yeah, why do you think adultery would be one of the things mentioned here? Why should the government care what a man and woman do in their bedroom?
I guess to try to keep them from fighting and like keep the peace, and it's just more of a just way for them to live.
Okay. Yeah, morals. It's a just way. It keeps the peace. You know, if people are only having sex with their spouses, it prevents other issues from happening in society. Yeah, great. Okay, so marriage is regulated under Code of Hammurabi. What other things? What other laws are there? What other things are regulated?
I know there's medical malpractice laws.
Medical malpractice laws. Do you remember which number that is? So we can all look at it.
I think one of the later ones.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Did anyone else catch that too?
It's like 218.
Yeah, 218. So page 26. Good. If a physician performs major surgery with a bronze lancet upon an awilu, and thus causes awilu's death, or opens his temple with a bronze lancet and blinds his eye, they shall cut off his hand. Wow. Okay. So we have adultery. We have government regulation of surgery gone awry, which I'm sure it often did, 4,000 years ago. I'm sure a lot of surgeries were botched. Kind of sucks. Kind of sucks for the doctor. What other things, what other laws stood out to you that you're like, oh my gosh, wow, or were noteworthy?
There was one about witchcraft. The second one.
Witchcraft. Okay. Number 2. If a man charges another man with practicing witchcraft, cannot bring proof against him, he who is charged with witchcraft shall go to the divine river ordeal. Submit. You have to be judged before this oracle or something. And the one right after that is interesting too. So someone's charged with witchcraft. If we can somehow prove it, you get to take all that guy's stuff. If he cursed you with a hex, put a hex upon you, that's bad. You get to take all of his stuff as a state. But the one after this is really noteworthy too. Sorry if you're going to go there, Madison. I'm just really excited to talk about this. If a man comes forward to give false testimony in a case, but cannot bring evidence for his accusation, if that case involves a capital offense, that man shall be killed. So we have a law against bringing false testimony against another person. Evidence is important in Hammurabi's Babylon if you're accusing someone of something. So we can divine here that we have a functioning justice system in Babylon. What other things are regulated? What other kinds of things does the law touch on? We've got adultery, medical malpractice, witchcraft.
There's a lot of things about owning slaves and what you can do to each other's slaves and things like that.
Yes. Okay. What does that tell us about Babylon?
That was a really important part of their society, having slaves. Yeah,
it's absolutely a slaveholding society, as were probably most civilizations in some way, shape, or form. Even Rome, the Greeks, the Romans, the whole kit caboodle in the classical period, they all have slaves too. not slavery in the concept that the modern slavery, the sort of chattel slavery based on race and generational slavery, but usually in the form of like someone could sell themselves into slavery to pay off debts, or a father can sell his child into slavery if he cannot take care of that child, or you're captured in a war. That's usually where slavery originates at this time. So yeah, lots of laws about slavery and ownership of other people, and this is, Emma said it really well, what you can do to those people legally. Logan, you had unmuted earlier. Did you have something you wanted to chip in?
Yeah, I thought that if a child hits his father, they cut off the child's hand was a little out there.
Yeah. Yeah, just a bit. Just a bit. So what is that? What does that maybe tell us about ancient Babylon, do you think?
Maybe shows us that like they were really strict with rules and like they wanted equal punishment for everyone, no matter age or anything like that.
Okay, interesting. Equal punishment. We'll come back to that concept in a little bit. But yeah, this idea of sort of respect and hierarchy of authority is very important to the ancient Babylonians, evidently, right? Or else they wouldn't have made a law about it, punishable in this extreme way. Speaking of punishments, we've talked about capital punishment, people getting killed, hand getting cut off, someone's whole estate going to the guy that accused them of witchcraft. Are these punishments, how do they seem to you as like modern 2021 Americans living supposedly in a civilized period? How do these punishments seem to you? Like, how would you describe them? Like, are they fair?
They seem pretty harsh and inhumane.
Inhumane. Yeah. Well, I guess why would you say, can we follow up on that, Hayden? Like, why would you describe them as inhumane?
Because a lot of these are kind of petty crimes like stealing or helping slaves, and they just are willing to kind of kill you for not huge crimes.
Yeah. Does anyone else see this like as inhumane or particularly extreme?
It seems a bit harsh to me, but also like, I mean, at that point you steal somebody's grain, you're stealing their food source, they're not going to be able to eat, so they're going to die. So I don't know, there's a certain extent to which it's like, it's sort of just, but very harsh. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, why do you think punishments, and I think you're getting there, Anna, I want to see what other people think too. Why would punishments like this be so extreme? Like, why, kill someone if you cheat on your spouse or you steal piece of bread, or like why are the punishments so extreme during this period? In your opinion, like, you don't have to be a historian to know exactly, but why do you think this might be?
I think it might be because of the religious nature, and also the climate and like harsh land of Mesopotamia. It's kind of like a desperate time. Okay.
Babylonian society and the laws mirror their environment. Like, Mesopotamia is it's a very fertile part of the world. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers flood frequently, and that regenerates the soil. Like, if any of you are like ag majors, and you'll be like, or 4-H, veterans, about like fertilization and like soil fertility and all this stuff. The downside of it, though, is this part of the world is very unpredictable in its climate and how much rainfall it gets. The Nile River in Egypt floods like on a regular basis. Like, you know when the Nile is going to flood and you can prepare for that. The Tigris and Euphrates, and like, which Babylon sits in between, you don't know when they're going to flood. You don't know how much or when or how often. And so people are constantly worried about where their next meal is coming from, because agriculture is just so spotty. Like, we could just wipe out all of our food, all of our crops, if we have a bad season. Either it's too wet or too dry, right? That leads to a society that is very concerned all the time about people playing by the rules, because if someone is greedy and they steal another person's grain or something, like Anna said, like, that could be their food supply for the year. Like, that could be the margin between life or death. So what we see reflected in Hammurabi's laws, the types of things that they monitor, the government is very concerned about health, very concerned about reproductive, like, the sanctity of marriage, probably because that's where babies come from, right? To perpetuate the population in this very unstable part of the world. They're very concerned about applying punishments to people who break the rules, because you're absolutely right, Dane. Like, this is a very harsh, unforgiving part of the world. And that anxiety over the future is reflected in this society's laws and rules. Like, we need to bind together as a people, as a team. We all need to be on the same page, or we're screwed, baby. Right? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely right. When it comes to punishments, though, did you guys notice any, and Hayden kind of brought this up earlier. I think it was Hayden or Logan. I'm sorry, I can't remember. You guys have brought up this idea of equal punishments, like kind of being, no matter who you are in society, punishment will fall on you for doing something. But did you notice that there are like different classes of people that receive different punishments for the same crime? So for instance, if you're a nobleman and you assault a commoner, you get like a small fine. If you're a commoner and you strike a nobleman, you get your hand cut off, or you get your head cut off, right? Why do you think there's these like extreme disproportionate like rules applied on different classes of people? Like, why? And do you think that's a fair thing to do? Just what are your reactions to that?
It doesn't seem exactly fair to me, in that each person is a person and they ought to be treated equally. But at the same time, there's an element of the order and respect that they had to maintain in their society, because they also, I think, had, from what I remember reading in our textbook, they had other peoples around them that they were trying to deal with as well.
Yeah.
And they had to keep like a stable country so that they could actually survive.
Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of born out of necessity, like we've been saying. Any other thoughts on this? Do you think this is this something we still see in like 2021 America justice system, where the law applies unequally to different classes of society? What do you think? Any other thoughts on this?
I think you could maybe kind of equate it to like bail money, where some people can just like afford to spend money on bail and get out of jail, while others like will never really be able to afford bail.
Yeah. That's a huge controversy right now. I'm trying to decide how much I should delve into like modern politics when I talk about this, but like, we have not quite figured this out. Like at least the Babylonians owned up to it. They're like, well, if you're a nobleman, you get a slap on the wrist. If you're a slave, you get put to death if you do the same thing. We live in a society that at least purports to have an equal justice system, right? The law should apply equally to everybody, regardless of who you are. Does it shake out that way in practice? Not really. I use this example. We were talking about the Enlightenment in my last class, because my History 102 class starts in the Enlightenment. And here guys are thinking about like justice, like these abstract ideas of justice and good government. And, you know, one of them saying like the law should apply equally even to the nobles. Like there should be some kind of like flat, like here's what happens to you, no matter who you are. But we're still figuring that out. Like it was codified in the ancient legal code that like there are different classes of people. We deny that in the modern period. We're like, no, we're all the same. But in reality, we have these people who, you know, are somehow exempt from the law. I use this example, and this is maybe a little harsh, but there's a story from several years ago now of this high school kid. I think it was down in Florida. His name's Brock Turner. Have you guys heard of this a-hole? It's kind of old news by now, but he sexually assaulted a classmate and got a slap on the wrist. Like it was like, I can't remember what it was, but the judge said, you know, he's this fine, upstanding gentleman with a future ahead of him. We don't want to like ruin his future by putting him in jail. People go to jail for sexual assault all the time, but the judge looked at this white upper class kid and said, you know what? The law, it doesn't really apply to you. And it was this huge miscarriage of justice that people got really rightfully pissed off about a few years ago. That kind of thing still happens. The ancients owned up to it and they said, no, there's this hierarchy. But maybe, like Anna is saying, maybe it's this like born out of necessity. You know, maybe it's this because things are so harsh and so unpredictable in Babylon, you know, there are social betters and you need to respect them because they are leading society and they know what to do. Like they're helping us all get through this. That could be one justification for this. One more thing before we move on. What kinds of laws apply to women specifically? And are there any protections for women in the Code of Hammurabi? Like, are women treated with at least some form of respect or protection, or are there any laws according to women specifically that you have noticed?
Like a pregnant woman, if she's beat, then she has to get paid for the fetus. If it dies.
Yeah, if a woman is assaulted and she's carrying and her baby dies, compensation is due to the woman. Like you can't get away with that kind of thing. Yeah, that's one example. Any others that stood out to you?
There were a lot about marriage where they were really trying to make the playing field even. I feel like a lot more than in other ancient societies, where like a woman could kind of separate herself from her husband or be compensated for that, you know.
Yeah, good. Yeah, men are allowed to cheat on their women, and it gets like, you know, they're punished, but it's not as harsh as like a woman cheating on a man, right? So there is that power imbalance there between the genders. But women are also protected, you know, when they sign a contract of marriage that says like if the man is unfaithful to them or doesn't provide for them, they can leave. They can go back and live with her dad, you know, until she gets married again. Stuff like that. So it's interesting that even in this kind of harsh, you know, unforgiving society and climate, women do enjoy some amount of protection, at least in the law of Hammurabi at the time. And maybe this is born out of necessity and not necessarily like progressivism, but still it's something that's remarkable. We can see that in the historical record going back, you know, 4,000 years. So any other thoughts on Hammurabi before we move on? I realize I'm spending a lot of time on this. Is one of my favorite documents of all time, just because it's so old and it's so cool, and there's endless things to talk about. Any other thoughts before we move on to the poetry? Okay, page 36, Egyptian love poetry. Like I said, these are kind of hieroglyphics, scrawled on. I don't know if it's pyramids. I can't remember what structures, but ancient structures, hieroglyphics, and we've kind of transliterated them into modern English. But the ideas are still very much there. What kinds of emotions, besides love, obviously, that's a freebie. What kinds of emotions or like complex relationships, or I don't know, what do you detect in these poems when you read these that kind of stood out to you as being like, oh, I'm living in the modern era, but this seems like it's timeless. Like what kinds of emotions do you see in these poems?
I like with the first poem, it seemed like kind of like a situation between like two guys and like one girl, and then like one guy was being weird, kind of being a simp, and then the other guy was kind of cool.
Yeah, I love that interpretation. Yeah, there's this kind of like pining after, um, hoping for a significant other. What other things did you detect in these poems? Any emotions or desires or longing, or what have you seen in this? What stood out to you?
In the second poem, the man was kind of talking as if his wife or whoever was like a goddess, like he worshipped her.
Yeah, that's hot. No, I'm sorry. No, that's like that's a timeless, like I'm here to demonstrate my love for this woman that I literally adore, 90% of pop songs have something to do with this idea today. Like this is a timeless idea. You see this in in later literature, even ancient literature, ancient scripture, the Bible, the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, for instance, has like a ton of like very like, salacious, like sexy love poems written from the perspective even of whether from like a woman to her man or vice versa. So this like almost like worship of someone that they love so much, it's just this utmost adoration. What do these poems tell us about ancient Egyptian society, perhaps? Like what you're reading these poems and you're like, oh, okay, like I see what's going on here. Here's a guy who's simping, or here's a guy who's like just so in love with another woman, or a woman who's waiting around for her man to show up, or walk by her house or something. What might this tell us about Egyptian society? Like, why did they record these poems in the first place? What does it tell us about gender? Just what kinds of ideas did you guys get when reading these poems?
I thought it was interesting that although you see the man praising the woman's beauty, you never see the woman saying that the man is handsome. So apparently that was not important.
Yeah, perhaps looks went one way. Women are still expected to appear beautiful to attract a mate. Just like, pretty much all of human society ever, the onus kind of falls upon the woman to enhance her appearance for men. So yeah, that could be, one interpretation of this. Any other ideas, like any other reactions to these poems?
love and lust and art are as important back then as they are today.
Yeah, evidently, or they wouldn't have taken the time to etch these onto the walls of their pyramid, right? Timeless ideas, human feelings of lust and desire and love. Yeah, Landon, you're absolutely right. Sometimes and the reason why, part of the reason why I assigned this instead of something else was to illustrate that idea that the people that we're talking about from 4,000 or 5,000 years ago are just that. They're people. You know, just like us. They just maybe don't have the wheel yet. Or antibiotics. Or, sugary cereal they can enjoy with their milk every morning. But they have these internal desires and these motivations to do human things and to record human feelings just like the rest of us. Yeah, excellent. Any other thoughts on this? What do these poems perhaps tell us about ancient Egypt?
It does kind of show another, I guess, power imbalance, because I know one of the notes at the top was saying how the poems were written by men rather than women.
Yeah, it would have been rare to have like a literate female, really illiterate anybody at this point. Like these are probably poems written or at least transcribed by like priests, like the people who needed to be able to read and write. And they're all men. So yeah, perhaps there's like the female ideal is baked into these poems that may not be accurate to what was happening at the time, because these are all men kind of writing from the perspective of women, and like they don't know what a woman they have no idea anything woman, especially if they're priests. So like, yeah, it's this kind of guessing game and projecting the ideal femininity into these poems. So perhaps there's an element of inaccuracy to these poems. We don't know. It's very hard to tell. But what we do know are these universal feelings of love and lust and things, like Landon was saying, that are very much present, right? Well, good. I mean, this is going to give us a really good look into what ancient peoples found were important to take the time to write down or chisel down, and it tells us a lot about their motivations, their priorities, the things they thought were important, how they sought to regulate their laws and their culture. And that tells us a lot about the ancient period, because we don't have anything else really. We have very little else in terms of like written documentation from 4,000 years ago. So history is a guessing game. So what I'd like to do now, and this is a really good start, guys. You all had some really good observations and ideas. I would like to see this more as we go on, because we'll be discussing a lot of this stuff as we go forward. What I'm going to do now is, and take the rest of our time to do, is pivot towards our first assignment, like our first analysis paper. So let me take the time here to do that. I'm going to share my screen with you. I have not put this up on Canvas yet because, to be honest with you, I am still learning how to canvas properly. It's a completely new platform to me. So by the end of today, you will have module 2 for next week ready to go for you, including a lot of information about the assignment. The analysis paper that you saw on your schedule that's due for next week. And so this is it. This is it in, ignore the date. This is the wrong date. That's from last semester. I just need to copy it over. The first assignment is to write a short paper. And I'm by short paper, I mean like really short, like 2 pages would be good. You could go to 3 if you have a lot more things to say. You could go more than that if you really wanted to, but I'm looking for like 2 pages minimum, double spaced. about an essay that seeks to address the historical documents that we read most weeks. And so I'll just read it here. Using the paper template, which I'll show you in just a second. Craft a 2 to 3 page or 500 to 700 word, roughly, essay that addresses the questions below. And you're going to use the documents from your perspectives book, including the ones we just reviewed. The documents from weeks 1 and 2, so this week and next week, as evidence for your answers. So these are evidence-based essays where you're going to be answering these questions, but you're going to be citing the documents, the historical documents, as like firsthand sources to provide evidence for your answers. And then you'll upload the paper, not on Blackboard, but on Canvas. And I'll give you a link to upload the paper. But the questions are this. It's a 2-part essay. Number 1 is, how did ancient civilizations, the ones we've read about so far, Babylon, Egypt, and the Hebrews, and we're going to be talking about the Hebrews next week, how did they view the divine? In other words, what kinds of god or gods did they worship? And how do they imagine themselves having power over the lives of humans? So next week, the topic is ancient godhood. And we're going to be talking a lot more about religious structures in the ancient period. But some of what we talked about today applies to this question. For instance, like Babylon, the Code of Hammurabi was inspired by the gods. Hammurabi sought divine intervention in constructing his code of laws, right? So you can use that as an example to answer this question. And then question number 2, how are women perceived in these ancient societies? Did women have any particular restrictions placed on them, and why do you think this was? So again, this relates to some of the stuff we talked about today, right? So these are the 2 questions you'll be answering in your first essay, and you'll be using the documents from this week and next week to answer those questions. According to the Egyptian love poetry, ... evidence, like here's my point that I'm making about that, right? And you're going to be citing these documents as evidence. And the whole reason for these, and I'm going to share this so you don't have to like worry about scrambling, writing this down or anything. I'm going to share this with you on Canvas. The purpose for these document assignments is this. You guys are in an honors Western Civ class. And I don't want to be elitist about this. Like, I don't want to be, but like, you guys are smart. You guys are in here for a reason. A lot of society today involves making baseless accusations or claims based on no evidence at all, right? We could think of very pertinent recent examples. For instance, the election was stolen. Based on what evidence? Like, well, let's go to court. And in court, they can't provide anything because these are just statements that people make, to convince you to feel a certain way. Turn on cable news at any time of day, especially at night, whatever channel it is, and you're going to have some talking head saying something, but not using evidence to back up what they're saying, right? This is bad. This is a bad trend that we're seeing in society. And you guys, as college educated, smart people, need to break this cycle. You need to learn how to make good reasoned arguments using evidence to back up what you're saying. Because I believe, and probably hopefully you guys believe, that truth matters, that facts matter. And if there's nothing else that you take away from this class at all, other than the fact that you are able to make an argument based on evidence and facts, I've done my job. Like, I'm happy, and I will grade you appropriately if you can practice writing essays in which you are using evidence to back up what you're saying. That's the whole point to these assignments. Okay, does that make sense? I'm not torturing you guys, putting you through the ringer, making you write a bunch of these papers just because I cackle at the thought of you, having to write. No, it's like I want to help train you guys how to think critically and make good reasoned argumentation based on facts, because our modern society sorely needs people like you to do that. And it will serve you well in whatever career you go into, even if you're not a historian, right? Okay, so the other thing I wanted to show you is, and I'm gonna post all this stuff on Canvas and a lot more on Canvas by the end of today. The other thing I wanted to show you real quick was the instructions mentioned the template, the paper template I would like you to follow. Let me find it here and share it with you. So the paper template is something I'm going to upload to Canvas, and it's simply the format that I want you guys to structure these papers. So at the very top, you'd have like your name, what class you're in, History 101, the instructor, that's me, and the assignment number, paper number 1. That's how you start out all these assignments. Uniformity is very important, whether you're writing a memo for your job someday, or even just crafting an email. Like having some kind of proper format is very important, because it helps the reader understand what's going on. I want these things written in 12-point font, no 13 or 14, no cheating the system on that. Times New Roman or Calibri for your type. Double space. These are double space papers, not single space. You're not writing a lot. It's just a couple pages double space. Default margins, don't mess with that. And then, all this stuff up here. Essay structure. Every good college essay should have an intro, a body, a conclusion. This is no different. Hopefully, you guys in high school, have already learned how to do this. But if not, now is the time to start sticking to that kind of format. So I'm looking for intro, body, conclusion, and all of these things. The body is where you make your main argumentation and evidence. Here I talk more about length and grades and citations and stuff, and you can read all this on your own time. The big thing, though, that I'm looking for is citations. These are short essays, and I'm just looking for like simple, parenthetical, end of sentence, like here's where I got this information from. So for instance, down at the bottom, I give you an example. Punishments fell especially harsh on Babylonian women in the ancient period. For instance, Law 153 says that if a man's wife has her husband killed on account of her relationship with another man, they shall impale that woman. Like that is a piece of evidence you can use when talking about gender in your analysis paper. Like that's just one example. And then after that quoted part of the document is the citation. Code of Hammurabi, like here's where I got it, and the page number that I found it on, like the page number of your perspectives book. That's all I want, and that to me is like a good, simple citation. I don't need you to use like MLS or MLA. I don't need you to use like Chicago. Like there's a bunch of citation styles. For the purposes of this class, just throw in a parenthesis at the end of the sentence with the title of the document and what page you got it from your book. That's all I'm looking for. Maybe your English classes will have you do something different, and that's up to them. But let's just keep it simple for this class, okay? Because the point is to just cite evidence. I don't care how you do it. Just give me evidence to back up what you're saying, okay? Does all of that make sense? Are there any questions relating to this assignment so far? Okay. If you think of any, email me, let me know. I'll be happy to help you. On Canvas, I'm going to post like a whole section in the module for next week about like, I'll have like a video about the, just me prattling on more really about this paper assignment. I'll have sample papers for you to look at. I'll include a couple sample papers from like other classes, other students writing one of these things. So you kind of have an idea of what to look to craft your own paper. And I'll include like the prompt and the format, the template and everything like that. So you know how to go about this. All right. Well, that's basically it. That's what I've got for you guys today. Any final questions or comments or anything before we go? Lovely. All right. Well, you guys are awesome. Thanks so much for a great, rich discussion today. I look forward to doing that again next week. So for next week, you'll just do some more textbook reading for Monday. Or no, well, Monday, technically you have Monday off for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and you should enjoy your day. For Tuesday, we'll be talking about the Hebrews. We'll be talking about the kind of ancient religion in a broader scope. So just be here on Tuesday, and we'll go from there. All right. Thanks, guys. You're awesome. Have a great weekend. I'll see you later.